director, Shui Bo Wang. In fact, the song played during the opening and closing credit, I Love Tianmen in Beijing, used to be my favorite childhood song for two reasons. First, it honors Beijing, the city I was born and grew up in. Second, I was not musically inclined, as many chorus boys and girls in the audience tonight. So the easy tune of the song was all I could handle. I'm so honored tonight to be invited to talk, and thank you for this opportunity. And thanks to my dear friend Jenny Lin, who believed that when Ha Jing, the award-winning author and English professor at BU, could not come tonight, I will be the next best choice. We are going to China this time in April. Can you show me your hands? The few there? Okay, great. I have a little quiz here for you. The first one is a memory test. Next slide, please. Up to which year the story of the film Sunrise over Tiananmen Square ends? Can somebody tell me? It's actually 1989.
Okay.
The second question is to see if your general knowledge of China. Which of the following would you possibly see when you land in Beijing or Shanghai this April? I'm not sure this C is possible because that's during the Cultural Revolution. We don't do that anymore. All the other pictures are true, but above number C where they are having the red scarf. So great. The reason I would like readers or audience to pay attention to the time or year of any Chinese story, the year is that China has changed so much in the last decades and century, and continues to change at such a fast pace that what held true once may not a year later. But that does not mean that we should forget about China's past. Quite to the contrary, learning about China's past is crucial for one to understand China's present and future. I came up with the following few slides just to give you a little flavor of the Chinas I have seen in the past 6 decades. During the Cultural Revolution from 1966 to 76, every Chinese had to study and recite quotations from Chairman Mao. We call it our precious red book, as it always came with a solid red cover. Which of the following is Chairman Mao's actual quote? Actually, it's D, all of the above. I don't know if you guys can read. I tried to make it as big as possible. So it really gave you a sense of absurdity of the time when Mao's quotations were like a national Bible and the power of one person went unimpeded. So around 1976 to 1980, soon after the Cultural Revolution, children who had been sent to countryside for hard labor returned to classrooms. With Deng Xiaoping's reform and open-up policy, Chinese economy transitioned from bare survival to market-oriented socialism. Chinese people began to buy which of the following items for the first time in their life in 1966 to 80? It's a washing machine or refrigerator or color TV or black and white TV?
Black and white TV.
D is right, it's black and white TV. Because we did not have a color TV, refrigerator, or washing machine until much later. In the capital city of Beijing, there were only 2 TV stations that aired a few hours a day. Imagine all the extra time to do your homework. So in 1980s China, people were stepping out of poverty and began to enjoy basic comfort of living. We could buy roasted peanuts and sunflower seeds, 2 of the few snacks known to us, outside of Chinese New Year's. While we began to eat more and even gain weight, we were still behind in so many other aspects. In America, in America, we probably have as many lawyer jokes as there are lawyers. But in reality, there were only about 2,500 lawyers per million people in 1980. That number grew to 4,000 in 2014. But China has been governed by rule of man instead of rules of law for many years. One could even argue throughout Chinese history until recent decades. In communist China, communist party branches, work units, resident committees, and people's communes played an important role in enforcing government-issued directives. Police and court were only for violent crimes. I actually prepared this next slide before I knew we would have a Chinese lawyer here. So hopefully I have not flunked this one. So who wants to guess, in 1980s China, how many lawyers per million people were there? So, it's actually C is 11. So 11 lawyers per million people, when the US has 2,500. So in 1990s, our life continued to improve. So this is a personal picture of mine. So taken around 1993. I thought it was a big evidence. It's a great evidence of what was happening in China. First of all, food became even more abundant. Second, people began to work for foreign companies. Here, the man in the middle was my boss, who is from New Jersey. Thirdly, unlike during the Cultural Revolution, when we rarely traveled except for a death in the family or occasionally for the work units, in the 1990s, we began to travel a lot more for family reunions, for leisures, and for business. Here, my boss and I traveled to the west end of China in Xinjiang, and the young lady was from our Xinjiang province, our branches over there. So even though I left China in 1994, we all know the astronomical economic growth and vast improvements in many aspects of China, of people's life in China. Next slide, please. China's GDP grew about 200 times in the past 6 decades. From these two images, you can see young people on the street with their smartphones, and the bottom is a scene of the city of Shanghai where you're going to visit this April. And if the number of lawyers per million people is any indication of more developed legal system, it had grown from 11 in 1980s to around 90 in 1998 to 150 in 2011. But for a country as big as China, as you could imagine, its challenges are oversized as well. Personally, I often think of these 3 challenges in China. One is the population. I don't know if you can see very well. It's, all these little black dots are people. This is a beach. So people are basically elbow to elbow here on the beach. And the next challenge is the pollution. You can see this is a Tiananmen in the back. I don't know if you guys can see. And in the front, you can see people wearing the masks. So the pollution is also a huge problem in China. And the next is the disparity between the wealthy and the poor. This is actually very typical scene of Beijing. A few years ago, I visited Beijing, and this is exactly what I saw. I had a good friend who had a German car. She drove me around, and so on the right you can see an Audi there. On the left is actually an old man cycling a tricycle. All these big bags inside are recycled bottles and materials. So he's trying to sell those things. So you can see the big disparity between the wealthy and the poor, and that can be a big problem for the stability of any society. And actually the main reason I was invited tonight to talk was that I had written a memoir covering a similar time period as Xiaobo Wang did in Sunrise over Tiananmen Square, from 1960s all the way to 1989. Like the film, disillusionment was one of the central themes of my book, because China, had undergone such dramatic transformations in a short amount of time. Along the way, ordinary Chinese like myself had been faced with a world of disappointments, challenges, as well as opportunities. China has gone a long way, so have many Chinese people. I am a great example of millions of Chinese out there who have lived through these fascinating changes. In my life, I have lived with my grandmother, Nai Nai, who was born in 1894 under the ruling of Qing Dynasty's last emperor and had bound feet. My parents had to work wherever the government assigned them to, and as a result, endured long years of separation. Nonetheless, they were only grateful to have survived the Cultural Revolution when many of their colleagues, relatives, and friends had been persecuted and some to death. I grew up in a tiny one-room home assigned by my mother's work unit until I was 18 years old. However, with perseverance and lot of luck, I was able to forge a life that my grandmother or my parents could never have dreamed of. I went to Peking University, fought for employment on my own, studied at Columbia Business School, and worked in a Fortune 50 company, traveled, lived, and worked in China, the US, and Europe. If time permits, I'd like to read one short passage from my manuscript, where I watched my Nai paternal grandmother wash her bound feet in a one-room home around 1974 to 75. My grandmother was 80 years old. It was time for her to soak her feet in the steamy hot water my mother had prepared for her in a wash bowl on the floor.